Robert screamed, "You're just a kid." Jasmine Crockett hit back with fire. In a heated hearing, one congressman's shout went viral, but not for the reasons he expected. Today, we'll unpack the clash between Robert and Jasmine Crockett, why one fiery exchange exposed generational divides, political strategy, and even the psychology of power. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age or told you were just a kid? Drop your moment in the comments because this story shows how power flips fast. It started with a shout that sliced through the noise of a congressional hearing. "You're just a kid." Robert's words weren't simply an insult tossed across a table. They were a spark, striking against years of tension, generational divides, and battles over credibility in political spaces. The phrase carried an old trick wrapped in new packaging: belittle the opponent, frame them as too inexperienced, and hope the attack lands before they get a chance to respond. But here's the catch: sometimes an insult tells us more about the speaker than the target. In that moment, Robert projected frustration, maybe even fear. Psychological studies show that when people feel their authority slipping, they reach for discrediting language. It's not random, it's defensive. And for anyone watching, that defense sounded more like desperation than strength. That's why the room shifted. Lawmakers have sparred a million times before, but rarely does a single phrase ignite a viral storm. This one did. Here's where it matters for real life. We've all faced a "you're just a kid" moment, whether in a workplace, a family argument, or even social interactions. Dismissal throws us into a corner unless we know how to flip it, and Crockett didn't just answer. She turned it into firepower. So what's the takeaway? Never underestimate the power of restraint followed by precision. An insult is an invitation. Accept it carefully, then reframe it to expose the weakness behind it. Insults reveal insecurity. Reframing them demonstrates strength. That's the game changer. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise in that hearing by raising her volume. She rose by sharpening her words. Her style is a blend of courtroom precision and street-level authenticity, forged through years as both a legislator and a trial lawyer. That dual edge matters. In politics, style often overshadows substance, yet Crockett proves you can weaponize both simultaneously. Where Robert tried to frame the exchange as teacher to student, Crockett flipped the script. She was not the student, she was the cross-examiner. Here's the key: Crockett's audience wasn't just Robert across the table. It was the millions watching clips online, the constituents back home, and the undecided fence-sitters scrolling through headlines. She layered her response so it worked on all those levels. To Robert, it was direct challenge. To the audience, it was clarity wrapped in confidence. Why does this matter? Because communication isn't just about the words chosen. It's about alignment of tone, body language, and timing. Studies on persuasion show that confidence delivered with clarity outlasts aggression every time. We remember the person who recentered the conversation, not the one who lost control of it. Crockett showed how to do exactly that. Stay locked in, keep the verbal blade sharp, and never, ever validate the insult by acting rattled. The practical takeaway? When confronted with a personal jab, don't match tone, pivot intention. Force the spotlight back onto substance. Crockett reminded us of a truth that applies whether you're in political debate, office meetings, or personal conversations. The strongest voice isn't always the loudest. It's the most composed. Confidence plus clarity equals lasting authority. Few insults feel as harp, or as familiar as being called just a kid. On the surface, it sounds like a harmless dig at age kid. But beneath the words lies decades of cultural baggage. It's shorthand for "you don't belong here," "your opinion has no weight," or worse, "your presence is tolerated, not respected." That's why the moment hit so hard. Robert's phrase wasn't new, but in the wrong hands, it reveals more weakness than authority. Psychologists call this a diminishment tactic, reducing someone's identity to a single supposed flaw. In offices, it's used against young professionals. In families, it's used to silence ambitious voices. And in politics, it becomes a weapon to undercut both credibility and potential influence. The irony, however, is striking. The more forcefully someone tries to dismiss another person as inexperienced, the more they admit feeling threatened by fresh perspective. Insult plus fear equals exposure. What Crockett demonstrated and why her reply resonated was that these phrases only cut deep if you allow them to. Words carry power only when the receiver grants authority to the speaker. By reclaiming the narrative, she turned just a kid into a showcase of exactly why she wasn't. That shift, from victim of belittlement to commander of the frame, is something anyone can apply. So the lesson? The next time you hear versions of that sting, too young, too new, too inexperienced, don't fight for permission. Prove presence through performance. Your results invalidate their dismissal. Your composure rewrites their narrative. Belittlement isn't proof of superiority. It's proof of insecurity, and using that inversion creates unstoppable leverage. Generational tension isn't new. It's a recurring theme across history. But when Robert snapped with "you're just a kid," it crystallized something bigger than personal insult: the widening chasm between political generations. In Washington, baby boomers have held power for decades, writing laws, shaping budgets, and setting national discourse. Enter younger leaders like Jasmine Crockett, millennials or Gen Xers who speak with urgency, directness, and a refusal to play by outdated rules of decorum. The clash isn't only about policy, it's about presence. Look closer, and you'll see a recurring pattern. Established figures often equate longevity with authority, while newcomers equate innovation with legitimacy. This generational duel plays out every election cycle, every debate stage, and even in workplaces across the country. But here's the paradox. The same youth, dismissed as lack of experience, also represents the fresh perspective voters are craving. Dual reality, same factor. For millions watching the clip, the moment symbolized more than Robert versus Crockett. It was tradition yelling at transformation. One side clinging to credibility through age, the other earning credibility through agility. And online audiences, especially younger demographics, quickly recognize the dynamic. When elders resort to dismissal, it signals they're losing grip on the narrative. So, what's the takeaway for all of us? Generational divides don't vanish, they evolve. Whether in offices, families, or politics, the most effective path isn't to beg older voices for validation, but to stand firm and let results prove relevance. Authority may age, but legitimacy is renewed each time someone younger rises unshaken. In that hearing, Crockett didn't just defend herself, she became a stand-in for an entire generation being told to wait its turn, and she showed the answer. Don't wait. Lead. An insult can sting for a moment, or it can light a fire. The brilliance in Crockett's response was her ability to take Robert's dismissive, just a kid label and flip it into rocket fuel. Instead of shrinking under the weight of that belittlement, she turned it outward, transforming his attempt to silence into a platform for visibility. That is empowerment in real time. Why did it work? Because empowerment begins not when insults stop, but when the target refuses to internalize them. Crockett could have reacted emotionally, descending into anger or defensiveness, but instead she channeled poise, using his aggression as a demonstration of her own steadiness. His words exposed fragility, her composure broadcasted strength. Dual outcomes, same exchange. And this dynamic isn't reserved for politics. In workplaces, countless employees, especially young professionals or women entering male-dominated fields, experience some version of "you don't belong." The difference comes in the handling. Accept the insult, and it becomes a ceiling. Reframe it, and it becomes a spotlight. Crockett chose the spotlight, and that made all the difference. Research on resilience shows that people gain influence faster when they reframe adversity into proof of capability. Instead of running from insults, they lean into the challenge to demonstrate maturity. Crockett modeled this live, in front of millions, turning the narrative on its head. The practical lesson? Next time someone tries to undercut you with a label, don't waste energy erasing it or proving them wrong point by point. Own the stage, redefine the label in real time, because when you transform dismissal into demonstration, the insult vanishes and your credibility rises. That's not survival, that's leverage. Robert's outburst might have felt unique in the moment, but it was really a continuation of a much older playbook. Throughout history, political combat has relied on put-downs to undermine opponents, especially those seen as outsiders or newcomers. From the early days of Congress, where rival factions traded barbs about education, class, or appearance, to modern debates where terms like naive or inexperienced are weaponized, the tactic has stayed remarkably consistent. It's the old guard remeen. Ding challengers, this is our arena. Think of it. John Quincy Adams was mocked for being too young when he first served as a diplomat. Shirley Chisholm was belittled for being a black woman daring to run for president. Even John F. Kennedy, before becoming a household name, was laughed at as lacking gravitas. Yet each time, those who endured the derision built their credibility not by silencing critics, but by staying unshaken. The insults became their proving ground. That's why Crockett's handling fits so seamlessly into history. She heard the words, recognized the antiquated tactic, and pivoted to showcase her backbone. Instead of validating Robert's attempt to diminish, she positioned herself within a lineage of figures who turned ridicule into recognition. She didn't just clap back for herself, she connected to a longer tradition of resilience and leadership. Here's the lesson. The insult itself doesn't determine destiny. The response does. History remembers not the exact words of the dismissers, but the resolve of the dismissed. If you're carrying fresh ideas into a room dominated by skeptics, recognize their words for what they are, not prophecy, but proof you're striking a nerve. Opposition signals relevance, and relevance is your strongest weapon. Here's the twist. Congressional hearings aren't really about the people in the room. They're about the nation watching beyond those walls. When Robert shouted, his words weren't just heard by Jasmine Crockett, they echoed through millions of screens scrolling on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube within hours. A decade ago, such a moment might have died inside the congressional record. Today, it becomes a flashpoint of national conversation, compressed into a viral clip just seconds long. That reality changes everything. In traditional debate, the goal was to persuade colleagues sitting in the chamber. But in the digital age, the true jury is public opinion, shaped by memes, sound bites, and shareable snippets. Robert may have thought he was disciplining a peer. Instead, he unknowingly built a megaphone for her. Viral audiences reward sharp wit and poise under fire, not volume or scorn. Crockett's calm counter landed because the digital crowd values narrative inversion, the underestimated figure turning the script inside out. The implications are massive. Politicians no longer control context the way they once did. Clips rip free of setting, circulate without background, and take on lives of their own. That makes media literacy and rhetorical command more critical than ever. Lose composure for 10 seconds and you risk becoming a meme forever. Hold firm for 10 seconds and you could build a brand. And here's your takeaway. Whether in politics, workplace presentations, or even family gatherings, the real audience is rarely who's directly in front of you. It's the unseen group judging from afar. Perform not just for the table, but for the people you'll never meet. That's how moments become momentum. Robert thought he was throwing a knockout punch. In his mind, belittling Jasmine Crockett as just a kid would minimize her presence, reframe her as an amateur, and reassert his authority. But here's the irony. Instead of shrinking her, he magnified her. Miscalculation doesn't get clearer than this. Why did it fail? Because his strategy ignored two powerful dynamics: the psychology of audiences and the architecture of attention. First, audiences today are hypersensitive to bullying behavior. Decades ago, dismissive remarks might slip by as normal banter. Now, they're instantly flagged as condescending, even desperate. People don't just hear the insult, they analyze the posture of the speaker. And in Robert's case, anger read as weakness. Second, attention dynamics have changed. Conflict itself isn't enough to dominate headlines anymore. What counts is who can flip conflict into composure. By snapping, Robert showed loss of control. By responding strategically, Crockett showed mastery. It's the sharp contrast between loudness and leadership, and contrast is what sticks in memory. This is the mistake so many leaders, managers, and even parents fall into, assuming that force equals authority. History and psychology say otherwise. Authority lives not in the volume of your words, but in the steadiness of your response when challenged. That's what Robert forgot, and Crockett remembered. So what's the personal lesson for all of us? Don't confuse aggression with influence. When someone lashes out to undermine you, recognize it for what it is: misalignment between their intent and their impact. Hold steady, let them reveal the crack in their armor, and then move with precision. Their mistake becomes your stage. Their miscalculation becomes your leverage. What makes a counterattack effective isn't just the words, it's the architecture behind them. Jasmine Crockett didn't simply clap back in frustration. She executed a calculated rhetorical move. Instead of matching Robert's volume, she layered her response with composure, clarity, and a bite of controlled fire. That subtle balance is why her reply not only landed in the room, but exploded across social feeds. Her first maneuver was reframing. By refusing to wear the label of kid, she recast Robert's words as evidence of his own insecurities. That jujitsu approach, using his momentum against him, transformed discredit into credibility. Second came contrast. His emotional outburst stood next to her measured tone, forcing audiences to immediately evaluate who looks more like the adult in the room. Finally, she employed projection. Instead of keeping the fight small, she spoke as if millions were listening, which, in reality, they were. That widened the battlefield and won her the crowd. This is the essence of rhetorical brilliance. Knowing your adversary's weakness isn't their argument, but their overreach. Crockett didn't silence Robert. She amplified the absurdity of his attack by staying level-headed. Audiences reward the person who demonstrates control when chaos erupts. The everyday lesson? When insults come your way, don't waste breath fighting point for point. Reframe, contrast, project. Make the aggressor's words their own downfall by showing a superior command of tone. Whether in a boardroom, classroom, or family debate, the sharpest counter isn't rage, it's precision under pressure. Crockett proved that strength isn't about who shouts loudest, it's about who reclaims the narrative. If you're finding these breakdowns useful, hit subscribe, because the next half digs into the hidden strategies politicians don't want you to see. Why do people reach for insults like kid, rookie, or amateur when they feel threatened? The answer lies in the psychology of underestimation. At its core, underestimation is a defensive reflex. When someone senses their authority or knowledge is being challenged, the fastest way to regain control isn't reason, it's reduction. Shrink the other person's importance, and suddenly your own feels bigger. But that shortcut is fragile because it exposes vulnerability. Strong leaders don't need to shrink others. Insecure ones do. Psychologists describe this as status protection behavior. It's the same pattern you see on sports teams when veterans dismiss newer players, or in offices when seasoned employees wave off fresh ideas as idealistic. The criticism isn't really about capability, it's about protecting hierarchy, the subconscious. As logic says, if I label you as small, my place stays large. Yet the opposite is usually true. The label undermines credibility, while the target often gains support. Crockett's exchange showed this dynamic in action. Robert's words weren't damaging her standing, they were revealing his mindset. By staying calm, she made the underestimation itself work in her favor. The insult carried his insecurity louder than it carried her inexperience. That's a reversal with real power. So here's the takeaway. When underestimated, remember it's rarely about you. It's about them. Underestimation is evidence you're pressing on an insecurity they can't cover. Instead of fighting the label, observe it as proof you're making impact. Counter not with defense, but with demonstration. Performance dismantles perception. And once you understand the psychology, you realize being underestimated is not a setback. It's an unspoken compliment. The real battle no longer ends in the hearing room. It begins there. What happens next is media amplification, the process by which a 10-second exchange becomes a cultural flashpoint. Robert's shout and Crockett's counter weren't just recorded. They were clipped, captioned, and shared across platforms within hours. CNN analyzed it, Fox debated it, social feeds remixed it, and late-night shows joked about it. A single phrase now carried more weight than hours of prepared testimony. Why does this happen? Because media thrives on moments, not monologues. Complex policy talk struggles to trend, but a sharp exchange that spreads like wildfire. Psychologists studying communication note the stickiness factor. Audiences remember clear emotional contrasts more than nuanced detail. Anger versus composure? That's memorable. So, while Robert may have thought his remark would be forgotten instantly, the amplification cycle turned it into a headline he couldn't control. This matters in real life too. We live in an age where context collapses. A comment made in a meeting, classroom, or even family dinner can be screenshotted, retold, or replayed beyond its original setting. That makes controlling tone and composure not optional, but essential. Once it spreads, you can't edit the clip, only the impression you left in it. Crockett's mastery wasn't just about her response. It was about anticipating the afterlife of her words. She spoke as though the world was listening, and in truth, it was. That foresight turned an insult into an opportunity. The lesson: Speak with the expectation that amplification is inevitable. Don't prepare only for the room, prepare for the replay, because in today's world, your biggest audience is the one you'll never see. Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Robert wasn't just about age, it was about intersection. Being dismissed as just a kid struck one chord, but being a young black woman in a room dominated by older white men struck another. That's the dual identity factor. When more than one stereotype collides, resistance isn't just doubled, it's compounded. And yet, Crockett didn't fold under that layered weight. She turned it into a mirror, reflecting the instability of Robert's position. Throughout U.S. history, women and people of color in politics have faced compounded dismissal. Think of Shirley Chisholm, who was routinely called unqualified simply because of her race and gender. Or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who even after winning her district was labeled too inexperienced to matter. The pattern is predictable. Dismiss the person not on policies but on identity. But each time, those targeted found ways to convert stereotype into story and story into strength. Crockett joined that lineage. What's striking is how audiences perceive these exchanges today. When layered stereotypes are hurled, especially in public spaces, younger and more diverse audiences recognize it immediately as unfair framing. That awareness powers solidarity. Robert may have been speaking to assert dominance, but to millions online he appeared as a stand-in for outdated gatekeeping. Crockett, by contrast, embodied what resilience looks like when navigating multiple fronts of dismissal at once. Here's the lesson for real life. Your dual factors, the things that others see as vulnerabilities, can actually become your credibility boosters. Being underestimated in multiple ways means you have multiple ways to overturn assumptions. Crockett's moment reminds us every layer of doubt can be flipped into another layer of proof. In politics, fire can be fuel, or it can be a trap. Too much outrage and you risk being dismissed as emotional. Too little and you risk appearing weak. Jasmine Crockett's brilliance in that charged moment was her ability to wield fire without letting it consume her credibility. She had passion, but it was calibrated. That balance turned heat into light. Rhetoricians call this mix controlled intensity. It's not about avoiding fire, it's about shaping it. Crockett used sharpened words, a steady tone, and strategic pauses, the hallmarks of someone trained in both law and public debate. Robert's explosion was wildfire, fast, loud, and destructive. Crockett's reply was torchlight, focused, illuminating, and sustainable, and that contrast made all the difference. The challenge in real life is similar. In workplaces, classrooms, and even families, emotion can overflow when we feel cornered. But untempered fire drains your energy and undermines your influence. Controlled intensity, however, commands respect. Audiences lean in when they see someone channeling passion through discipline, because it signals depth rather than instability. Consider leaders like Barack Obama or Kamala Harris, figures who know when to let the spark fly but never let the blaze scorch the stage. Crockett drew from that same playbook in her exchange. Emotion wasn't the enemy, unmanaged emotion was. Here's the key takeaway. Passion plus restraint equals power. Don't shy away from showing fire, but decide how it burns. A flame contained lights the path forward. A flame uncontrolled burns bridges. Crockett reminded us that true authority isn't the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. Sometimes the most surprising consequence of a clash isn't the feud, it's the friendships that follow. After Robert tried to shut her down, Jasmine Crockett didn't just earn applause from her own supporters. She caught the attention of people outside her usual base. That's the hidden ripple effect of high-visibility conflicts. They can forge unexpected allies. Why? Because audiences don't just align with ideology, they align with authenticity. Crockett's refusal to be diminished resonated with anyone who's ever felt underestimated, regardless of political party. A conservative professional dismissed in a boardroom and a progressive organizer brushed aside in a city hall meeting both recognized that sting. And when they saw Crockett push back effectively, some quietly nodded, even if they didn't agree with her politics. This effect has precedent. Think of figures like John McCain, whose firmness during town halls won him admirers far outside his party, or Elizabeth Warren, whose "nevertheless she persisted" moment became a rallying cry across political lines. Confrontation, when handled well, doesn't just energize your base, it intersects with universal human experiences. That's why unexpected alliances emerge from conflict. The common enemy becomes dismissal itself. For Crockett, that meant her viral moment didn't just affirm her with existing supporters, it expanded her reach. Influence grows not only by reinforcing what your side believes, but by gaining grudging respect from those who never planned to listen. Here's the lesson for your own life. When you stand strong in moments of dismissal, you might be surprised who starts rooting for you. Strength under fire humanizes you even to opponents, and sometimes the people you never imagined as allies become the ones echoing your voice. Strip away the congressional seal and the viral hashtags, and what's left between Robert and Jasmine Crockett is something deeply familiar. A clash we've all faced in smaller ways. The details change. The setting might be a workplace meeting, a classroom discussion, or even a family dinner, but the dynamic is the same. Someone questions your legitimacy, someone reduces your contribution, someone tries to shrink you into silence. What Crockett modeled in that instant is exactly what each of us can carry into everyday life. Think about the workplace. How often are young employees dismissed as too green or lacking perspective? How many women are told they're being too emotional when they're simply being passionate? Or students underestimated because of age, only to later outshine those who doubted them? Crockett's moment reminds us that dismissal says more about the doubter than the dismissed. The key is not to mirror their insecurity, but to make it visible. The formula she demonstrated is universal. Reframe, hold composure, project authority. Reframe the insult so it exposes the weakness of the speaker. Hold composure to prove the attack did not destabilize you. Project authority so others see you as steady, capable, and unshaken. When you can do those three things consistently, you no longer just defend yourself, you flip the entire power dynamic. So here's the everyday takeaway. You don't need a congressional hearing to practice this skill. You can practice it each time someone questions your competence or credibility. Crockett lived the reminder that echoing anger multiplies chaos, but reflecting calm multiplies respect. Your strongest clapback isn't rage, it's command, and command is what everyone notices. What happened between Robert and Jasmine Crockett wasn't an isolated flare-up, it was a glimpse into the new era of political combat, an era shaped less by policy briefs and more by viral battles. For decades, political sparring stayed inside hearing rooms, transcribed in dense records only die-hard followers ever read. Today, 10 seconds of fire can overshadow years of legislative work. This shift means politics is no longer just about governance, it's about narrative performance in real time. Here's the trend. Personal attacks are accelerating. Data from political analysts shows a steady rise in debates where tone turns personal, targeting character over content. Why? Because in the digital ecosystem, sharp conflict gets amplified faster than policy nuance. Insults trigger emotion, emotions trigger clicks, and clicks generate coverage. It's not noble, but it's effective. Robert thought he was controlling the narrative. Instead, Crockett's ability to flip personal attack into commanding presence revealed the actual future. Survival will belong to those who turn hostility into highlight reels. But here's the paradox. While the system incentivizes drama, public audiences are also evolving. They're getting savvier about detecting insecurity behind the noise. Leaders who lose composure risk becoming memes. Leaders who channel discipline under pressure get lifted into spotlight. So the game of politics isn't just about being loud, it's about being viral and credible. That balance is the future. The real-life takeaway? Expect more personal jabs in your feeds, but expect sharper comebacks too. Each generation of leaders is learning the rules of rhetorical judo. Attacks are inevitable, but control belongs to the one who reframes. Tomorrow's winners won't silence conflict. They'll master it. And in that new arena, composure is currency. Resilience isn't magic. It's muscle. And like any muscle, it grows stronger with practice. Jasmine Crockett's composure under Robert's "You're just a kid" broadside wasn't accidental. It was the product of resilience built over years of pushing through barriers, being doubted, and refusing to let others define her limits. What looked like instinct in the moment was actually skill in action. Resilience researchers describe it in 3 phases: receive, reframe, respond. First, you receive the blow without letting it break you. Second, you reframe the insult into evidence of the other person's weakness. Third, you respond in a way that not only neutralizes the attack but builds credibility in its place. Crockett modeled all three phases live, showing that resilience is not passive endurance, it is active mastery. In everyday life, resilience shows up in smaller but no less important moments. The job interview where your work history gets questioned, the college classroom where your perspective gets brushed aside, the relationship where your ambitions are doubted. In each scenario, you are being tested not simply for what you know, but for how you carry yourself under pressure. Composure is communication, and resilience makes that composure possible. Here's the empowering truth. Resilience isn't something you have to be born with. It's something you build. Small acts of standing tall after small dismissals create big reserves of strength for larger battles. Crockett's moment wasn't just about politics. It was a public lesson in what trained resilience looks like. And the lesson is clear. Resilience doesn't just protect you, it positions you. In the end, Robert's shout of, "You're just a kid," was more than an insult tossed in a heated room. It was a spotlight moment that revealed the shifting balance of political and cultural power. He tried to write Crockett into the corner as small, unqualified, and temporary. Instead, she rewrote the script in real time, showing the world that those dismissed as too young, too new, or too different often hold the very energy needed to redefine leadership. That wasn't just a clapback, it was transformation. What this exchange highlights is a broader truth about conflict. The words meant to diminish you can become the very fuel that propels you. Crockett demonstrated the art of rhetorical judo, taking an insult meant to pin her down and turning it into leverage that elevated her standing. Robert lost control of the story. She claimed authorship of it. That reversal is exactly why her moment went viral, because people everywhere recognize themselves in it. From politics to workplaces, classrooms to family tables, this lesson repeats. We don't rise by avoiding dismissal, but by converting it into proof of presence. Crockett's fire wasn't recklessness, it was resilience channeled into authority, and that's why her answer reverberated far beyond Congress. The ultimate takeaway? No one else defines your role unless you accept their frame. An insult is never the final word, it's merely the opening act for your response. And every time you meet dismissal with composure, clarity, and conviction, you don't just defend yourself, you reset the narrative for everyone watching. That's transformation in action. Reinforce themes of generational divide, rhetorical judo, and the power of refusing dismissal. Tease next content. If age can be flipped this way, wait until you see what happens when experience itself is questioned.